Today's a sad day for me because I'm losing a big brother. Darryl Roberts, from the moment I met him, adopted me as his little brother. And he's a good man, and he's suffering the ravages of old age and horses. You don't know his story about the horse. He got slapped in the head by a horse's head. And he's had trouble ever since. He's such a good man. I would urge you to really pray for him. He's beyond correction in this life physically. I'm pretty sure of that. We need to know what to pray for, you know. There are times when it's not even sensible to pray for a physical recovery, because we're not destined to remain here.
That's right.
When we're talking about Darryl, and you mentioned Beth, we got a lot of Darryls. And Beth is either blessed or whatever the other is from that. She has two brothers named Darryl, a brother-in-law named Darryl, and a father-in-law named Darryl.
And her father was Darryl.
And her father, that's a lot of Darryls right there. Oh, I want to try to do this lesson in such a way that it's not a downer. How do you talk about hell and it not be something of a downer? Did you get it? Okay. This is a kind of a history of the word hell. Did you know that the Old Testament has no reference to hell? It's just not there. The Jews did not have a concept of the afterlife that you could put your finger on. They had a concept of Sheol, which was death. And there are a lot of places in the Bible that talk about Sheol, but it's generally a place of silence, a place of inactivity, a place where you don't even worship God. It's a place of nothingness. But they had some concept of this afterlife. They just didn't have a doctrine that they could teach and follow. So when the Lord Jesus came onto the scene, He did not use Old Testament scripture to teach about hell. He chose something that was a metaphor. We've been dealing with metaphors lately here. It's kind of fun. Metaphors and similes. The word hell in the New Testament, there are two different words that are used in the New Testament for hell. One is in 2 Peter chapter 2, where the Apostle Peter describes what happens to angels that sinned and did not keep their proper place. He says they are kept in hell, but the word there is the word Tartarus, which means he borrowed that from Greek mythology, which we were kind of talking about this morning. But he uses the word Tartarus, which in Greek mythology was the deepest point of hell, where Hades, who was the master over that realm, put those that were there. It was the jail at the very bottom of the pit. But what we're going to read about And what we're going to look at is how the Lord Jesus chose something that was familiar to all of the Hebrews. Everybody who ever lived in Jerusalem would be familiar with what the Lord Jesus was going to use. He used the word Gehenna, which was a shortened form of what had been, to their understanding, a valley that they knew very well that was to the southwest of the city of Jerusalem. And it was, you can't, if you call it a valley, you're really stretching your imagination, because it really started out as kind of a grassy slope, and then it really turned into a narrow gorge, and it flowed into the Brook Kidron. And we're going to talk about both of those things because they both have the same kind of connotation. But I want to read the first time that this appears in the Old Testament. We're going to read from Joshua, when Joshua and the children of Israel conquered the land, and he was giving out the territories that all of the different tribes would have. This is one of the boundary markers of the tribe of Judah. In Joshua chapter 15 and verse 8, here's what Joshua says. Then the border went up the valley, or a narrow gorge, of Ben Hinnom to the slope of the Jebusite on the south, that is Jerusalem. And the border went up to the top of the mountain, which is before the valley of Hinnom. That's the very valley that we're going to be talking about. He says, which is at the end of the valley of Rephaim, or the giants, toward the north. You remember the giants that the children of Israel, when they went in, they were scared. They said, we're like grasshoppers in these people's sight. So 10 of the 12 decided they couldn't fight against such giants, and they decided they would not want to go in. So that's why they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, because they didn't have the faith to go ahead and do what God said. But one of the boundaries here is this valley of Ben Hinnom. Now, Joshua records this, so and the book was written by Joshua. We're pretty sure about Joshua writing the book, except for the last few little bits of Joshua where it says things that he couldn't have said after he died. So it was finished by someone, but Joshua wrote the most of the book of Joshua. But he talks about this valley, or this gorge of, and it's called Gai Ben, which is son of, or sons of, Hinnom. This is a non-Jewish, this is some probably Canaanite family that owned that land when the Israelites came into it. It becomes a hiss and a byword in the language of the Israelites. And we'll talk about how that happens as we go on down here. Now in Jeremiah chapter 2, we have another reference to this. And this is Jeremiah. Now, when you read the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah had some contemporaries. Elijah was not one of them. Isaiah was not one of them. Neither was Elijah. But Isaiah prophesied 745 years before Christ. This is at a time in Jeremiah, this is about 600, and Jeremiah is prophesying about what's going to happen to both the northern tribes, the tribes of Israel, and the southern tribes of Judah. And here's why he says what he does about them. He says, how can you say, and here he's talking about Judah, how can you say, I am not defiled? I have not gone after the Baals. Look at your way in the valley. Know what you have done. You are a swift young camel, entangling her ways. I was watching, Angel has a little puppy yesterday. You know, young animals are like young kids. They don't know what they're doing. And when you see a young puppy just running and charging everywhere, they'll run as fast as they can run on a floor that they have no traction on, and they will slip and slide and bang right into the wall. They'll bang into a car. I saw a dog one time, a young pup, that ran and grabbed a hold of a tire, and it flipped him around several times because his teeth got caught, and it just flipped him and busted him all up. They just don't know what they're doing. Well, that's like this camel that he's talking about right here. They get entangled in their ways. We talked about that this morning, about how we get entangled in things, and we're doing something wrong when we get entangled in it, but sometimes it's way beyond our knowledge and our understanding of what's going on. That's why it's so important that we do what Josiah did when he learned. This is an interesting king right here, Josiah. Bubba read about Josiah this morning. He was 8 years old when he became king. And immediately he started doing things that you wonder, how in the world can an 8-year-old have such understanding about God? I'll tell you how. He had a mama. He had a mama that taught him. How grateful should we be for mothers? Mothers that are teaching the children while the king is busy running the country, sometimes running it wrong. And yet this mother taught this child what to be and how to respect God. Joe, I appreciated what you said last week when you said you liked some place where they read the Bible. We need to read this Bible more because in it are the words of life. And Josiah realized that they didn't know sickum about what was happening and going to happen. They were so totally out of the ballpark when it came to understanding how God felt about things. So he read the book. He had the book read to the people. And the people were learning how to be God's people again. So Jeremiah is saying, you can't say that you didn't follow the Baals, because look over this ravine right here. Look down into that valley and you'll see what you have done. Here's the thing about that valley. In Jeremiah chapter 7, he says this about it. For the sons of Judah have done that which is evil in my sight, declares the Lord. They have set their detestable things in the house which is called by my name to defile it. The detestable things. You know, we talked about several different gods and goddesses. Baal, he was supposed to be the god of the weather, the god of thunder, the god of lightning, the God of rain. So Elijah challenged that God and said that it wasn't going to rain for 3 years and 6 months. And it didn't. Elijah was proving who had the power over the rain. Was it Baal or was it Jehovah? So in this process, there were the prophets of Asherah as well. So there were 450 of her prophets, and there were 400 prophets of Baal. And they came to the mountain where Elijah challenged them over the rights to God's people. If it is you, then you show us your power. He challenged them by having an altar set up with a sacrifice on it. And they came and they tried to get the fire to come out of heaven, because their God was the God of lightning, you understand? It was the God of lightning, it was the God of fire, it was the God of rain, which they hadn't had for 3 years and 6 months. Well, to make a long story short, they failed. They kept dancing around. They kept cutting themselves. They kept doing everything in their power to get their God to listen. And Elijah was saying, what, did he go on vacation? Is he asleep? Maybe he's not home. What's wrong with your God? And finally, he called lightning out of heaven and destroyed them all. 850 of them. Did Ahab learn? No. Did God's people in Judah learn? No. Read what he says here. For the sons of Judah have done that which is evil in my sight, declares the Lord. They have set their detestable things in the house which is called by my name. When Bubba read, he read about how he took down the horses of the sun. Egyptian horses, fashioned after Egyptian horses to Ra. And the chariots of the sun. He burned those with fire. Now all of the things that are burned with fire right here, I want you to listen to this. He says they have built the high places of Topheth. Topheth either means, and it's kind of hard to know what this word means. They've tried to figure it out. There's several different meanings it might be. It might be burning. It might be sacrifice. Or it might be the sound of drums. There's words that are similar. They're thinking that it might be the sound of the drums that were used in sacrifices to Moloch. We'll talk about that in a minute. He says they have built the high places of Topheth, which is in the valley of the sons of Hinnom. Here we go, this valley that we're talking about. To burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I did not command. And it did not come into my mind. God says that didn't even enter my mind to have you sacrifice your children in the fire. But guess what? Just a few miles down the valley and around the corner is the place where God told Abraham to offer Isaac, his son. Is that a contradiction? Or do we understand what God was showing Abraham about the future? What He would never require of us to offer our children as sacrifice, because God did not let him do that. He didn't let him. He stayed His hand and He provided. As a matter of fact, the place where God told Abraham to go, where He said, go to Moriah. The meaning of that word is the place where God will provide. When Abraham repeats that to Isaac, he says God will provide Himself a sacrifice. I've thought many times about that. How did He mean that? God will Himself provide, or God will provide Himself a sacrifice? Just around the corner, down the Brook Kidron, is the hill where Jesus was offered as sacrifice. But this valley of Ben Hinnom, in verse 32, Jeremiah says, therefore, behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when it will no longer be called Topheth. Now, Topheth, that was the practice or the describing the sacrifices that were made in this place to Moloch. And what they did was they offered their children as human sacrifices. Ahaz, the king, we'll read about him in just a little bit. Ahaz, one of the kings of Judah, started this by offering his children to this god Moloch in these caverns down in this ravine down here. It says the valley of the son of Hinnom. But the valley, it will no longer be called Topheth, or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of the slaughter. For they will bury in Topheth there. because there is no other place. The dead bodies of this people will be food for the birds of the sky and for the beasts of the earth, and no one will frighten them away. Then I will make to cease from the cities of Judah and from the streets of Jerusalem the voice of joy and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, for the land will become a ruin. When you read about this place, Ben Hinnom, it has nothing but gore and sadness and death involved with it. He goes on in Kings. It says in 2 Kings chapter 16, in the 17th year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah, Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, became king. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and he did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord his God, as his father David had done. Notice how it calls David his father, but he was his great-great-great-grandfather, somewhere in there. But he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, and even made his son pass through the fire according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord had driven out from before the sons of Israel. Can you see why the Lord said, take them out, get rid of them, obliterate their name from this place? But they didn't do it. He sacrificed and burned incense on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. You know where we get a good number of our holidays? You know who Asherah was? There are a number of names for this goddess depending on where you go in the world. It's Asherah, Astarte, Istra. That sounds familiar. Istra. Have you ever wondered why the goddess of fertility has a Christian day, so-called, named after her? And all of the symbols of Easter have to do with what she was supposed to be, this goddess of fertility. We've been showing the Diana is the name, Artemis is the name of the Greek name, Diana is I think that's the right way, Diana is the Roman name. Same goddess, Asherah, Astarte, all of these things. The goddess is the same way. It's this. I don't know how anybody finds this attractive, but she's got breasts all over her. Nothing but breasts. What is the point in that? Fertility is the point in that. It's eggs. What are eggs? That's fertility, is what that is. What is a bunny? Everybody knows you get 2 bunnies, you're going to have 200 bunnies soon. That's the way that works. And all of it has to do with these emblems of these gods and goddesses which are not. But they were offering sacrifices to these under every green tree. The problem is that the idol was carved into the trunk of the tree. So every time they would pass by an oak or a tabernacle, they would bow down and offer some offering to that tree. When nature becomes more important than the God who created nature, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. It says, he sacrificed and burned incense on the high places and on the hills. Every hill had some kind of an altar to some kind of a god. It's how Paul recognized the same thing when he got to Athens, and he goes up this winding path, which I have walked, that winding path, and every turn in the path had some god that they were paying homage to, and one of them was to the unknown God, and Paul used that to describe the one true God none of them really understood. I'd like to stop here and try and do something different. I want to try and get an article that I want to read to you. Let me see if I can do this. I'd like to shut this off so I don't show you all the articles that are on the side of this thing. We don't need that. But I want to read this to you. This was written back in 1999, an article in the Washington Post, written by Edwin Black. If you think this place that we're talking about, this Valley of Ben Hinnom, is not a historical fact, listen to what he writes about this, because evidently it is still today just like it was then. It says, below the old city walls in Jerusalem there was a ravine that begins as a gentle grassing separation between the hills, then quickly descends south into the rocky earth. Eventually the ravine becomes a steep, craggy depth, scarred on the far side by shallow caves and pits pocked by hollowed-out chambers and narrow crypts. Those chambers and those crypts are where they were offering children to Moloch. Listen to what he says. Everywhere you see scorches and smoldering from trash fires. Remember what Jesus said about Gehenna? That where the worm never dies and the fire never goes out? That's what Jesus is describing. He's using this place to describe where none of us ever want to reside. The garbage dump of humanity. He says, everywhere you see scorches and smoldering from trash fires, rivulets of urine trickle down from open sewers at the cliffs above. Here's something that I discovered. The potter's field, where Judas hanged himself and died, that was turned into a monastery. All the sewage runs out of the city down into this valley, down into the caves, down into, it says, rivulets of urine trickle down from open sewers at the cliffs above, watering thorn bushes, weeds, and unexpected clumps of grass among the outcroppings. You smell the stench of decaying offal, the congealed stink of putrefied garbage, and absorbed reek of incinerated substances seared into the rock face. Crows circle low. Worms and maggots slither throughout. This is not a pretty sight. But this has been this way for thousands of years. Abraham was somewhere in the neighborhood of 2000 BC, and we're 2000 AD. That's 4,000 years of this place being like this. He says, listen, imagine some people cannot help but hear the tormented screams of babies being burned alive, the macabre incantations of the idolatrous and gruesome celebration, the agonized cries of helpless victims, and so many echoes of death and disconsolation that dwell here so pervasively, not even centuries can silence them. Welcome to hell. Because that's what Jesus called hell. This was his closest physical illustration to describe the garbage dump of souls. This is Jerusalem's Guy Ben Hinnom, the valley the gorge of the sons of Hinnom. The valley was named for an alien, non-Semitic family, the Hinnom clan that predated the first temple by 1,000 years at least, and established the locale as a place of abomination. Well, they didn't establish it as a place of abomination, but it was used by people that created this image of this place, and it has held it ever since. Those who walked through the biblical valley of the shadow of death walked here. I know David was familiar with this place. I don't know that David's comment about, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. I think he meant, anytime I face death, God is with me. I think that's what he meant. But he knew what this place was all about. Hellish images of unending torture and fire as punishment for a life of evil owe much to the hideous acreage. Just a short walk from the path of righteousness that led to the Temple Mount. Just a short distance. You know, you're talking this morning, Marty, about when we veer from the path, it doesn't take long for us to forget. When you read the story of Josiah, you wonder, what happened that they didn't even know there was a book of the law? How did that happen? They had priests. They had all of those people who should have known. But they didn't. Because it doesn't take us long to forget. It doesn't take us long to forget. Oh, the hellish sacrifices that were made there. The writer continues, he says, perhaps it's fitting that the path of hell begins delightfully. I looked at a picture that they show in the Israeli brochures for tourists. You remember I said it started as a grassy slope and it quickly went down into this hellish ravine? The picture they show you is that beautiful grassy slope with flowers in it that leads to this. Sin is always tempting. We don't have time to do what else I wanted to do. I wanted to talk about the Brook Kidron. Because this flows into the Brook Kidron, down the Kidron Valley, down toward the Dead Sea. The Brook Kidron was where all of the blood from the Temple Mount flowed. It was known, the name Kidron means dark, ashy, ugly. That's what it means. It's not a pretty thing. And this horrible valley flowed into that valley, and that flowed down past the temple, in between the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount. Can you imagine how much blood, how much death was represented in that river, that brook? When 22,000 oxen are killed, or 20,000 oxen, I can't remember which it is. But there was 40-some thousand large animals that were killed, and the blood flowed through that channel from the Temple Mount down this brook. It became known as death, the valley of death, the valley of blood. That's why Jesus used it for that. I have no idea that there is literal fire in hell. Maybe, I don't. You know, like John said about what we're going to be in 1 John chapter 3, verse 2, he says, we don't know what we're going to be. I'll tell you what, when we see Him come back and we see Him, then we'll know what we're going to be. That's how we're going to know what hell is like. I don't want to find out. I can tell from everything that the Bible is written in the Bible about this place. I don't want any part of it. I think we can take a lesson from young Josiah. 8-year-olds can be really smart when Mama taught them right. In the 16th year of Josiah, he started making reforms. He changed Judah. He brought the people back. The people recognized their king. 6-year-olds? 6-year-olds can do wonders for God's people when they have a mama that teaches them right. We need to learn this book. We need to learn what's right and wrong. We need to learn it not as a set of rules, but as we need to understand what pleases God and what doesn't. We need to understand how we can put a smile on the face of the Almighty. We need to understand what David was doing when it says that David was a man after God's own heart. He sought God's heart. When we were talking this morning about driving, about speed limits, if you see a bunch of children playing by the side of the road and you're going way faster than is safe for those children, you should not need a speed limit. You should instinctively know you don't want to hurt those children, so you slow down. That's why I like your road there, you guys. Drive like your kids live here. That's a good thing to say, because that's what we all ought to think about God. Doing what is pleasing to God, because He always does and says what's in our best interest. It's never just to keep us from having fun. The lesson is yours. I hope we're going to deal some more with eternity, but I want to try and put more of a smile on everybody's face. I'm looking out there and I'm seeing this is kind of gruesome, and I guarantee you, but it's in there and we need to understand it.
We should smile, but hopefully we're not going to be there.
Hope, that's the whole point, isn't it? Isn't it, Russ? All right. The lesson is yours, folks. If you need to obey the gospel, make this the day that you do it. Won't you come while we stand and sing the song that Derek has for us?